Hello, everybody. My name is Carrington Davis. I'm with the Breaking Barriers Project Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm here with Otis Young, Otis B. Young. Otis B. Young is an African American pilot, one of the first African American pilots. There have, of course, been flyers during the wars, but commercial airlines, Otis B. Young is one of the very first, and it was significant because he took the first 747 flight from London to Los Angeles back in the day. This is Mr. Young, Otis B. Young, originally from Washington, D.C. First of all, you flew for Pan Am Airlines, am I correct about that?
That's correct.
When was that?
I joined Pan Am in 1966, Valentine's Day, in fact, in San Francisco.
What made you decide to become a pilot in the first place?
Well, you know, when kids wanted to be firemen or policemen, I wanted to be a pilot. Never wavered.
From childhood?
From childhood. One of my long ambitions. And I was successful in doing it. I was very fortunate in being surrounded by people who encouraged me and motivated me. So mine goes way back, toddler or
Did
5,
you have
6 years.
Have little airplanes you played with, model planes you worked
No,
on?
unfortunately I didn't, but I did when I got to junior high school. I had some fun science fair projects in which I did some work with the engines. I had a bulletin board and made the engine the curvature so that you actually could see the components inside, and it was kind of in 3D. I was really proud of that one project, but no, I didn't have a lot of, because there wasn't a lot of money around. So, but that undying ambition or desire, I never wavered in that.
That's unique that people decide at a very early age what they want to do and achieve it.
Well, that's true. It is unusual, but and I mean it goes even deeper in terms of the courses that you take, the schools that you attend, and so I just kept focused on what I wanted to do.
Were you ever in the military?
Yes, I went through the Air Force ROTC program at Howard and qualified to go to pilot training. Now, they also have a program, the Air Force has a program in which they contract a local fixed base operator. The one that we dealt with was in Baltimore or Annapolis, I'm not sure, in which they give you 35 hours in a small airplane. I flew the Tri-Champ, which is kind of like a Piper Cub in that same category. I think the theory is that if you can't fly this, they're not going to invest money in you flying the jet. And the second thing is, oftentimes between the time you qualify to fly and actually go and fly could be as much as 4 years. So it had a elimination motivation component to the FIP program.
I understand that at Howard, many of the people in Air Force ROTC were former Red Tail Tuskegee Airmen. Is that your
That is
experience?
correct. But and I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I appreciated who they were. They were sharp guys, and they nurtured us. But I didn't know the history. It took me leaving Howard and going out and being in conversations with other people until I had a fuller appreciation of who these guys were.
Right.
You know, and I think a lot of aspects of our history is the same way. But we had sharp guys that were part of the detachment at Howard, and really remarkable people. And they did very well by us because they nurtured us and kind of formed us. And at the time, they were getting their 4 hours of flight training at the old bowling field. And I guess those of us who were gung-ho, they would invite us to go with them. And so we get in the seat and manipulate the controls. So that was my first actual flying experience.
You were born in Washington, D.C., am I right?
Yes.
You grew up and went to high school here in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
When you were coming along, did it ever occur to you that there were no black pilots and airline pilots, although you knew you wanted to be a pilot? Did that ever enter your mind?
You know, it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, I guess, just being blind to the fact that, well, I knew they were military pilots. And I guess my theory was that I could do my flying in the military if that, and that's the way I really started out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was I went to pilot training in spring of '61, graduated in spring of '62, and I had a C-130, that's a Hercules 4-engine transport, assignment in France. And so I went to that assignment, and the airlines started to hire in about 1964. And some of my contemporaries went to work for Pan Am specifically. I think we all wanted to do the international thing. And we would see them like in Berlin and some other places, and they were telling us how much money they were making and how it's a good time they were having. Mm-hmm. And it blew our mind, you know. Mm-hmm. But another aspect was that my wife did not like the military. And if you're going to make it a career, I think it's essential that you have the whole family behind you. So I put in my papers. I went to several airlines and was hired by Pan Am. I look back at the experience, whereas on paper we all were pretty much the same. We all had technical degrees. I was an instructor pilot, and I just made captain. So on paper we all were alike. I just didn't know how I would be received in the industry. Mm-hmm. So I it was a World's Fair in New York. I'll never forget, this is in 1965. So we came to New York, and I had called ahead and asked for an interview. And the lady said, well, what are your qualifications? Well, I had the brochure. So I just read the brochure down because I had all of the qualifications. And so when I went to Pan Am, it was an interesting experience. Everybody stopped what they did, mouth dropped. And I just, you know, for the young people, I was clean. I mean, I was really had done it. And we went through the procedures and everything. I may relate to you, we talk about a little racism or whatever. When I went for my final interview, now I've been through all the physicals and all the testing and everything, and I'm ready to hopefully be yes or no. And so we're having a friendly conversation. There's a vice president for ops, a chief pilot, most of the major technical and flying people, I guess, to screen. And the chief pilot in New York looked me straight in the face and said, have you been arrested? And I said, no, sir. Now, I know that the paperwork that I had filled out covered that particular thing. Mm-hmm. And so, and then he looked at me again and says, are you sure? And so I considered myself thinking quicker than he did. He may have been trying to just aggravate me into blowing up or blowing off at him. I said, I want the job. So I just said, yes, sir, I'm sure. And that was it. But I'll never forget that incident. And, you know, I had some interesting experiences, and not too many in terms of race, fortunately, but
Well, probably a lot has to do with who you are.
I think so. Um, I like to make the comparison. Now, I'm not a star like Jackie Robinson, but Jackie Robinson, there were other players who were as good as ball players. Branch Rickey selected Robinson because of his attitude,
Right.
that he could take the jeering and all the other stuff that he knew he was going to be exposed to. Now, I don't know if that I can make that same comparison, but I think attitude is very important when you quote breaking barriers.
Right, it is. It requires more than just skill. It requires tactfulness.
That's true. That's true. So I was hired in '66 and went to San Francisco, and actually ended up flying in Vietnam. You know,
Oh.
Pan Am had the contract for R&R. They had an exclusive contract for R&R, but we ended up flying a lot of troop replacement and also cargo. So I ended up spending a lot of time in Vietnam when I had no real plans to ever go there.
Did you spend time on the ground in Vietnam?
An hour at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the key to your career, is the flight that you inaugurated of a 747 and the series of 747 flights from London to Los Angeles. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah.
Or do you see that as
See,
significant?
the airline operates on a seniority system. The seniority determines everything. Now, I was hired a particular day, and there were 50 pilots hired that day. And I had never won anything before. They put all of the names in a hat and pull them out to determine the seniority. Out of 50 pilots, I was number 5. So that means I have 45 pilots junior to me just
Day one.
from day one. And so that's how I ended up getting the slot for the 7-4. But the publicity was something that just I stumbled upon. I had come back to the university to represent the Bay Area alumni group, and we had lunch, and I'm talking to a guy and telling him what I'm doing, and next thing I know, Ebony Magazine is calling me, because I figured they had done the research, they knew who it was, they had gone to Boeing to see if there was any misleading aspect of the story, and so they sent a photographer and a reporter, and he followed me to London, around London, and then back to LA, and then he followed me home and took pictures with the family, and I was active in Big Brothers, and my 2 little brothers took pictures of me with with them, and the thing just blew up. It went ballistic because all my family, all my friends and people, I don't talk too much about it, but everyone else talks about it. So I feel fortunate in that regard. I have done some other things, because checking out as a captain for Pan Am, probably one of the most satisfying things to do. And around 1980, maybe a little earlier, 76, the airline industry was stagnating, particularly with Pan Am. And I felt I needed some kind of personal growth. So I had an opportunity to start to export parts for heavy equipment, trucks. And see, my initial degree is in mechanical engineering. So I've always been interested in mechanical things. And it worked out pretty well. So the problem is that the countries are a little bit unstable, and they had a coup, and I can't go into all of the political and cultural aspect, but some of my clients had to run for their lives. They were in the States, so it kind of brought my project slowly to end.
So you were an entrepreneur.
Yes, yes, yes. And I feel very good about it because I would take my son with me when I would go to various venues and vendors to collect stuff to ship. And he went to UVA, and then eventually, like we talked about, went to Wharton. But I think his concept of being an entrepreneur, of doing something yourself, I think I want to think that possibly I planted that seed by just taking him around and showing him. And he has his own business now, so I'm pretty happy about that.
So you, I imagine when you were flying, there were a lot of people would come to you and say, I'm really happy to see you as a pilot. You get a lot of that?
Yeah, I would get compliments on being there. And of course, there's always a flip side. I've had people walk up and tell me they want me to carry their bags, you know, and I said, you know, you got to be diplomatic and you got to be sensitive. And I said, I'm Captain Young. I will go and see that you get a Skycap, you know, without, you know, going off. Or conversely, I've had this happen. I'm flying a shuttle. I've had people get on the airplane, look at me, and walk off. So
they missed their flight.
Yeah, that's it.
Native Washingtonian, you were telling me that your father was very supportive of what you were doing. He was very supportive of your career and helped you get started by getting you some work.
Yeah, my father was a cement finisher, and so the first year it didn't work out so well because we had a transit strike in Washington, and I had to actually borrow money from my uncle to start Howard that first semester. But I started to work with my father. I had been working with him quite a bit, just on weekends, holidays. So he had been the president of the union and convention representative, and so he was well known. And he got me an apprentice program. And I may have been talking to the other gentleman, but he quit his job, and a lot of times our parents do things that we don't completely understand. So he quit his job, and there was a black contractor who had 1 million square feet of concrete to finish. This was what I call a rambling style junior high school in Kenilworth. And so we end up going there. I'm the apprentice, so I work with the laborers. And then when we get the concrete knocked down, I come back and float and trowel. So at the end of the summer, I could handle myself pretty well. And I had 4 uncles who were all in the same job. So I could get a job pretty much when I wanted one. And so I worked, I don't think in the next 4 years, I missed very many days during the summer. And the salary was equivalent to probably some government jobs and things like that.
You worked with a lot of pilots. What about the other black pilots that you worked with?
Oh, there weren't that many initially. When I was hired in '66, I would say there were probably half a dozen in the whole industry. The first guy with American, Dave Harris, member of my church I was telling him what I was doing, and so he recommended that I contact Dave. And over the years, we've, you know, I don't see him that much, but we have a mutual respect. And there was an organization of black airline pilots formed primarily to help reduce the problems of getting minorities into the airlines. We did seminars on interview techniques and other aspects of the qualifying process. And then I met a whole lot more by going to the conventions. So we made a lot of progress, and a lot of guys got jobs.
Did you have any stories to tell about mechanical difficulties?
I've been lucky. I had what I call an uneventful career. I mean, I know people who shut engines down and stuff like that. I make a little joke about, and I had an aunt that really liked this. I said, I never bent any metal or made any people bleed. So, you know, when you retire at 60 and you've had a pretty clean career, that's I interpret that as being a blessing.
So you're lucky.
Yeah.
What about you left the airline pilot business and you became an entrepreneur in international trade. What was that about?
Well, I did the international trade pretty much while I was flying. See, we were going to Africa, and rather than going to the beach and chase the girls, I went into town and chased the dollar. So once I retired, I just decided I got into boating and trying to do things with the family like that.
What was your experience at Howard when you were in Air Force ROTC? Was that something that was noteworthy to you?
Yeah, in the sense that the people there, the Tuskegee Airmen that we were talking about previously, were very supportive. And the Commandant seemed to like me. I had done everything I could to progress. And so I ended up being a cadet colonel that year, my senior year. And I can attribute it, part of it, by some of the knowledge and insight that he gave me. So in that regards, now that we could always argue about other aspects of the Howard education, but I won't go into that. But the ROTC aspect of it was very, because I had been the drill team commander, and we went to summer camp. I was the outstanding cadet in summer camp, and so I had a good career in ROTC.
If you were to advise some young people about becoming an airline pilot, what kind of advice would you give them?
That's extremely difficult nowadays because they've changed the rules, number one, and it's a very expensive process. Now, you could go to one of the aviation schools, Embry-Riddle, I think it's a couple of them up in Pennsylvania, and get a degree in some aviation-related subject, and they guarantee you a commercial with instrument. Then you used to could take that information and go fly for what we used to call a feeder. But with this accident we had where the guy wasn't probably not qualified, they've upped the flight hour requirement for that particular position. But the other aspect is going into the military, and if you can get into pilot training and fly that way. The only aspect is that when I came out of pilot training, I had a 4-year commitment. So 4 years plus the one in training, I had a 5-year commitment. Nowadays, that commitment is up to 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So if you're not going to be a career officer, that's a lot of time that you're not spending in your desired career field. So it's a little difficult to advise them on what, because you don't know what their resources are and that type of thing. I encourage them to, if this is your dream, go for it, because I know that's the way I was treated. And so if I'll talk to a kid all day if he wants to talk about flying, because the enthusiasm and interest, I can relate back to when I was at that stage,
So you like the thrill of it. What was it like when you took your first flight and knew that you were going to be a pilot?
Like I said, we manipulated the controls with the other Tuskegee Airmen. The FIP program, and when I soloed, that was you by yourself. You're just up there, and it's all up to you now. You don't have an instructor with you. And so that kind of alerts you that this is the real deal now.
So a lot of people have this vision of a pilot as someone I know from the military. They say two people really have issues: dentists and pilots. They They just have because of the tension in what they do. Is that true for you as well?
There's a lot of tension involved, but your training nullifies some of that, and your experience. I had really good luck in being with good people, motivating your mechanics and load masters so that they do a good job, so that you don't have to worry about that. And so you basically focus on doing the job, doing as professional a job as you can. So if you are trained well and you're conscientious, you're trained to deal with almost any emergency, and hopefully you don't have any. I didn't have that many of significance, either in the military and or commercial.
So your life is charmed because as a barrier breaker, someone who came through at a time when African Americans weren't offered a lot of opportunities, particularly as airline pilots, and for example, you broke the barrier smoothly, basically no pain, probably because of who you are.
I guess you could say that. Yeah. But you got to burn the midnight oil and be prepared. And so yeah, I think I took the job very serious. Maybe some people say too serious, but no, I enjoyed the flying. When it was time to retire, I didn't really want to retire because I enjoyed flying and I enjoyed the people I was working with, but the paperwork just started to overwhelm me. And
well, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank everyone for helping us tell you the story of the barrier breakers of the 1960s. Mr. Young, Otis Young, first 747 pilot to fly to Los Angeles from London. And we look forward to talking with you in the future with other barrier breakers. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.